57talk.com, Gary Cubetta, Scottsdale, Arizona, and a very special guest today, the great Johnny Powers, veteran of the professional wrestling circles for ever since 1963 full-time. And we're going to take you behind the scenes, the early years of an international wrestling champion, both as a performer in the ring and as an iconic visionary promoter, booker, and TV producer. JP, pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure, too, to be with you.
JP, you were involved with professional wrestling in a very transitional time frame, the 1960s, the 1970s. And I'd like it if you could take us back in time to how you began in wrestling and actually take us inside the ring and behind the doors of the locker room. What must it have been like to be a star as you were growing up in the 1960s?
It was really interesting for me, and at that time I didn't think of myself in terms of being a star. I was following my passion. I had lots of inner fire that had come from early years, but it truly was a transitional period because it was coming from the carnival era in the 20s and 30s and 40s where there was really great hookers and shooters, and the American style catch as catch can really dominated internationally. Folks that were Greco-Roman guys that would come over and challenge the Hackenschmidt, Sandows and all that came from the European side, the great Gamas that came from the Indian side, and they came in and they were carnival performers way back in the early days of the P.T. Barnum. So a lot of folks think he only was around the circus, if anybody knows what he is, but he was actually one of the first folks that took the strongman act, carnival act, big cities to the small cities to the big cities around the world, and that morphed into wrestling, which had a strongman aspect to it and a carnival, us versus the locals. And so that was still there. That was the era of Lou Thesz, who came out of that. Before that, Ed Strangler Lewis. Before that, a fellow named Farmer Burns, not a very big guy, but tough as nails, who could take and beat 300 pounders, and he was, if I remember correctly, before my time obviously, but maybe 160 pounds or so, 70. And so it was morphing from the true styles that were international, whether it came from the various foreign styles and that, and morphed into an international style, was morphing from straight-up wrestling, take your best shot, no business. Oh, it was always business because there was money. Wherever there's money, there's business. And then it got into more showmanship with Buddy Rogers, who was Gorgeous George, Buddy Rogers, folks kind of took it more in a showbiz vein, still with good rest. So basically, it was fascinating. I look back and I didn't realize that it was what it was. I actually started business around age 30. That would be about 1956. Thesz were active then, bunch, and I started in a small gymnasium, a community center called Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which at each end of the town had two ex-pro wrestlers. Their end game was to have a gym, teach weight training and physical fitness, pro wrestling to those. And so I came out of that environment. I went to the gym when I was 30. I just took like it to a duck to water. It just was natural.
JP, when you were a kid, what type of wrestling did you watch on TV?
I watched it was the Dumont Network. You got a picture of this for you folks. They're a little, my dad had a 5-inch screen, black and white. We would, all us kids, get around laying on the carpet rug, watching a little 5-inch monitor. On it would be from Buffalo, New York, channel 2 or 4 or 7 there. We would see the Lou Thesz's, Gagne's, Killer Kowalski's, all in black and white. So they were magical, mythical little.
Did you think at the time, hey, man, I'd like to do this someday?
No, I actually wanted to be a geologist, and I've been doing poetry. Well, from as early as I can remember, I was always I like to write and I like to do poetry things. So I thought I'd be a geologist, and I never thought about doing that. Then I went to university, physical sciences program. I found out that it wasn't all pretty Indian maiden gold in every second ledge. It was black flies and muskeg and tough work and not much money. And so I then said, well, maybe I could switch from this. This is as I'm starting to learn and gain some prowess, amateur wrestler / professional. And I said, well, how about I go into academia, become a professor, and I will follow my path as a poet. And I said, by the way, how much do poets? He said, well, you have to die before you become famous. I said, well, that's not very good for a young man who only wants to chase girls to become famous early. So, but then what happened is I backed off from that, and I had developed this skill set through this Jack Wentworth, some tough guys in the back gyms of YMCAs, and I said, well, I'll take a year and a half or so off, see if I can find my path, not thinking that, and I'll just see if I can do this pro wrestling. which had been evolving by its own all the way alongside. So by the time I was 15, I was in the gym. I walked at 15. I remember I walked into a gym, 6'3", 159 pounds, because I had leaned out down to just nothing but bone, muscle, and gristle. And I was a rower, 8 guys in a shell with 4 rowers on each side, and you beat the clock 5 minutes. I went in there within a year and a half, 6 foot, 268, truly determined. All through that, coached wrestle amateur-wise by this Jack Wentworth a little bit. Finally, I said, Jack, he's about 55 years old. I said, Jack, professional wrestling guys. He said, oh, really, kid? Went in, let's go at it. Well, he beat so bad, he hooked me. He hurt. Not didn't kill me, but he hurt me. I bled from every orifice that you could bleed from. Didn't get to school for 4 days. Come back, you got to teach me that. And so from 15 and a half to 7, he taught me how to get on the mat, find holds, take holds, dominate, and also learn to be a showman. Every Friday night, he would have, such as the little gym would hold, 50 or 100. They'd pay a small amount of money. We'd get in there. We'd do matches. We'd do pro matches. So I had actually a lot of training. When I was 7, I'd sent off him to Detroit, small territory, run by Jack Britton and Bert Ruby. Really good territory.
Is this before Ed Farrett?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is before Eddie Farrett.
Okay.
Yes, who was known as the Sheik.
Okay.
His wife Joyce. They owned that territory. And so I would be going there 6. I was sent in, go against the tough top guys who could beat me if they wanted and did beat me and then gradually, so I'm going to university 200 miles from my hometown as a pro, not making no money. But I learned my trade. So then at the age of 20, I went full time. I decided not to go forward into a career as a geologist then I went full time in that first territory. First territory was but going back as I'm listening to us talk about early years, and I became a student of other folk. Luthez has fascinated me, later the Gene Kaniskis, a whole bunch of later the Carl Gotches and the Buddy Rogers, and because I was looking for modeling. I actually modeling against other people. Early on, part of what I brought to the table, I guess, was the fact that I was really an artist. I viewed myself as an artist early on. Didn't have a paintbrush. I had a body. Be worked on, be able in a gladiator kind of ring, a wrestling ring, or a boxing ring. Because I wasn't sure I had 4 pro box, but I wasn't sure if I didn't want to go to pro box. But I ended up a pro wrestler. And so, but early on, I was scoping for things. I was evolving my own persona. Like my heroes were folks that were business heroes. They ended up helping the promoting end. I remember early stages, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, Maxwell Malt, plastic surgeon, who wrote a seminal book called Psycho-Cybernetic, which was basically about he would take a girl with maybe too big a nose and give her a beautiful looking nose, but she didn't think she was still pretty because it was about the internal image. And I started trying to marry the internal image of an athlete, myself, and to watch other folk and pull that all together. It's called NLP now, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, mentoring, modeling other successful folks. So that's kind of how we morphed in. So I took those kind of curiosities, artistic leanings and inclinations, and a bunch of rage. I don't know where I got it. Mom says I'm Irish, and Mom says my tough-spirited guy who is always on prowl. Because I think genetic, huge thing in all our lives. Determine our size, they determine our attitude, our inclinations, and all that. So I think key things that determine a potential good sports athlete or wrestler or physical side are genetic, and then the environment, and then the early stage mentoring.
And JP, you had a unique combination. You had size. You're 6'4", right? You also tremendous mat wrestler.
Yeah, I lucked out. I got trained by really good guys. I didn't brag that I was a shooter or a hooker and all that, but I could defend myself. I understood what to do almost instinctively on the mat. I was shy, started out. I probably still am a little shy. It doesn't sound it. But as soon as I stepped into a ring, I felt at home. I felt it like it was my turf. Things just kind of fell in place. Confidence came up, clear thinking came up. What they call ring sense. It was there.
So you had the size, the strength on the mat, and also, as you're already speaking of, you thought of things differently than the other wrestlers did. It wasn't just to make a buck. You really were an early thinker in the 60s in that you really thought, how can I get myself over in a different way?
Absolutely. I didn't know it then, but I was in the brand building mode, just like anybody else crafts a brand, IBM or Coca-Cola or Google or whatever, craft a brand and have that intellectual property. I was crafting a Johnny Powers. I didn't have it that well thought out, and it was also, I always viewed, I love art. I love music. I love physical art. Me, the performance in the ring was, how can I maximize my art? Me as the individual, me with the other wrestler, me including the referee, me including all the fans. It was an art trying to get as much depth as I possibly could.
JP, how did the other guys take to you? I mean, they must have said, this guy's a little different. He's young, he's strong, he wrestles, thinks.
Yeah, they thought I was cocky and arrogant because I stayed by myself in a corner and be reading my book, Will Durant, the history of philosophy or something like that, or playing chess with Johnny Valentine and hung around it. And so they thought I was arrogant and cocky, and I wasn't actually. Was just had my own rhythm going. Even when I was a promoter and I'd walk through a dressing room and someone would be talking to my guests and I wouldn't hear them because I was thinking about matches and promotions and the television side and all that, and I'd tune out. That at that moment was extraneous background noise, right? And so I got kind of a lot of folks thought I was arrogant, but I actually wasn't. I was focused. I was focused on my art.
Were you nervous the night of a match? Did you?
Yes, but not until got close to it. But then once I started to lace up my boots, I had a kind of a game I played myself. As soon as I get in, I would try to not think about the match, because many times I was the promoter or the booker or the television guy, dance guy. I had other roles, separate roles, being a dad and a husband and stuff like that on the road. So my game was, I don't think about it till you start to lace up your boots. By the time you've laced up your boots, you get any nervous. So I'd only be nervous by the time I'd take off my street shoes and start to lace up. By the time I'm at the top, then I'd say, time to get in business. And so I start to ramp up. I'd talk to myself. I'd go over and punch a locker or something like that. I try to ramp up, because to go in the ring, you need lots of testosterone and rage and forcefulness, and you don't necessarily always want that as booker or negotiator for TV shows. So I had to do the mental switch. I had to find a mental switch it on to go in and give my best.
JP, name me some guys that you might see in the locker room in the early days that you were fond of.
Early stages, Larry Shane, out of that first territory, Bert Ruby's joint Jack territory, was an unbelievable talent. Part masochist. I remember one time I was watching him. Larry, what do you got in your back? He had this great big high plate, purple, raised up by about close to a half an inch, bruise on his lower back, lower left bar region. I says, that's a hemat. He says, watch what I'm going to do to it. He says, I'm going to tell the guy to body slam me, boss. Geez, this is a tough business. Maybe I should have not been a back poet or something. But he also taught me unbelievable time. He had a thing that I've never seen anybody do like he could. It was called a death walk off the apron. So visualize this. You're wrestling with Larry Shane. He gets somehow outside in the apron, and you're going to hit him some way, either with a fist, an elbow, or a drop kick, preferably against the jaw. He spins, and as if he's forgotten it, just steps off the apron going flat. Remember, in those days, we didn't have any special mat impacts with hard concrete.
And how would he land? Face first?
He took it.
Or back? Front?
No, always the front.
Oof.
And he taught me this, and maybe that's why I'm going to get a hip hop. He would take it so he'd turn, he'd hit palm that was close to his nose, hit side of his cheek, he'd hit his shoulder, pec, side of his hip, along the thigh, edge of the boot, simultaneously. If he was off by an inch, he had a chance to crack, break open his cheek, bust it out. Any other thing. And when you heard that smack, even me inside, if I was the one delivering a drop kick, because you can't see him, you deliver a drop kick, you turn in the air, you're going to hit your front, you're going to get up. By then, he's taken this death walk off, and all you hear is this. Your heart would stop. I mean, you just thought. And so he taught me to do that. Not as well as him.
JP, could the crowd even see it? I mean, it wasn't something that was televised. And ringside, the fans are there. It'd probably be kind of difficult to see, right?
Only the first three rows would be able to see it on the two corners. He would usually do it on a corner. Everybody else would just hear it. But they'd see this guy go off the thing, and they'd hear this ugly smack, flesh against concrete, right? And you'd hear the whole. And I was in buildings with him that would hold, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 people. They'd all go, oh. He was such a believable worker. He was there, a guy named Ricky Cortez. George the Animal Steel was there in early stages. Another guy who's I have lots of respect for, very unique talent. And I hear you got him on sometime in the future. Great guy. And so those were the first ones, and then would be coming through Dick the Bruiser, the original Sheik, Eddie Farhat.
Okay, well, I'm going to pause here. Dick the Bruiser. Now, yes. I remember Dick the Bruiser from late in his career. He couldn't move in the ring. I talked to Larry Matisic, who told me that early in his career, Bruiser was just incredible. Can you take me back in time?
Yeah, not a very tall man, actually, because you know how we all, myth grows, right? And so I thought, well, meet him, he's going to be, 6 foot. But he come in and he just, I don't know if he was 8 or 5'9" or whatever, but built like a little brick outhouse. Huge pecs, huge neck, and cigar hanging out. And he was like that all the time. And getting in trouble all the time, out of the ring and in the ring. One time I got in a little trouble lately. He told me, I got in a little trouble like this, Powers. And I said, "What'd you do?" I went hunting. What do you mean you went hunting? Well, I have a submachine gun, and I went out to the government's forest, and I was looking for deer. Yeah, I got one. And they caught me. Yeah. How come you're out? Well, my mama's got pulled. His mother was the head of the political party in that area, and she was always pulling out a scrape. Tough as nails. Worked with the Green Bay Packers. They blew him away because he wouldn't toe the line. You know, in football's a team sport. Wrestling's a solo, to say the least. Great in the interview, great persona, and a superb ring psychologist. He could go against Andre the Giant, make a match. He could go against Midget, which he had one little bruiser, make a match. Brilliant guy. Loved him. Great talent.
Ed, the Sheik.
Well, I got to tell you a funny story because
go ahead.
the business is a little sexual, and Bruiser would go out and interview, and there would be fans knocking on the door. It didn't matter if they're female fans or male fans. He'd take his cowboy hat. He'd have all his clothes off. He'd go out with his cowboy hat over his private parts and discuss with things with fans. So and then he'd walk away, and here's this bare bun bouncing as he'd go away, and he'd be giggling. Him and Valentine and a few guys like that in Fargo were unbelievable for those kind of a little weird and a little woolly sexual shenanigans.
Yeah. Okay, the Sheik. What was the early days, the early 60s?
Eddie Farr had an original. He was the first that I know of that took his wife Joyce, made her his in-ring maiden. Savage and folks like that copied that Angle persona later on. Lots of energy. Didn't have the world's greatest body. Was not a bodybuilder. Not that tall, but he had huge energy and went nonstop. I mean, he didn't go for 60 minutes, but for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes that he'd go, he was keeping on going. And he had the damn pencil.
Did he use the pencil in the early 60s? Because he kind of got more hardcore as time went on, didn't he?
Yes. I'm trying to think. I was in the 60s and the 70s with him. Pencil for sure was around the 70s and probably the late 60s. I don't think he had the pencil thing then. He didn't have so much the flash fire stuff then. It was just the uniqueness of him and the rug and praying to Allah, and his wife is the slave, and he would be punching her or kicking her or whatever. And that more than anything, because that was the era when most of your fans, there was, like in New York State, you couldn't have someone under 16. And people came to it dressed with a hat and a tie, and the ladies with a hat and a nice up dress and all that. And for a male to beat up a female, appear to beat up a female, like that was enough heat. You didn't need more heat.
Did you talk to the Sheik in the dressing room, or was he kind of private? You know,
he was very private. Yeah, he was private. He was to himself, and he had his own game for him. He went all over the territory and wouldn't drop balls. Right, he get qualified, but he didn't do jobs for anybody. He had his own game, and he was hot, and he knew it. So later on, Abdullah the Butcher, who I have lots of affection for, carried it the same way.
Were there guys in the 60s that you were like, it's not a shoot, so to speak, but were there guys that you were a little bit nervous with? You're 6'4", you're big, but there's some pretty tough guys in the business.
There was always tough. I always knew there was. In any sport, there's always a guy bigger, stronger, faster, tougher. And I was pretty cognizant of that early on. And I was going into the wrestling as a business and not just an alley fight. If you want an alley fight, I sometimes carried a shiv in my boot, carried a knuck sometimes in my crotch.
Wait, right into the ring?
Yeah, inside.
Wow.
And I had a pistola sometimes, and I had a pipe. And I let folks say, listen, this is what you're going to do. We don't have to do it in there. We can do it in the alley, or we can do it in the dressing room.
Wow.
And so, but I never made a point of being that tough guy, and I never made a point of being a shooter, because I knew there was Carl Gotch would be undoubtedly a better shooter than me, and Lou Thesz, and a bunch of folks. But so it was a mix. But I'd be wary of them. I don't think I was afraid of them. I was wary of them. I was aware that they could hurt me and I put myself in a compromising position. And so I never said, okay, why don't you get on top and see if you can take? I'm not that stupid. Not in front of 10,000 people where I want to come back and look good again, right?
JP, early in your career, did you have any moment in the ring where things got out of hand, or maybe somebody took a shot at you and you thought, that a little bit of that was on purpose?
Times, yeah. Lou Thesz, I never liked to be slapped. Ultimately, you could punch me and I'd giggle, but I never liked slapped. I was only 2, I guess. Hometown Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, in the ballpark. I'm going against the world champion Lou Thesz. My hometown. I got my friends, family there, and all that. Thesz had this habit of sometimes just before he locked up, like the big old slap, like a bitch slap.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking about it, prepared for it. He went smack into a couple, because I really didn't care if I ever got fired. So the promoters, nobody owned me because of that. Because I thought, well, I don't know if I want to stay in this business. So I never had a fear of being fired. Lou, he looked at me and laughed. So he got by it. But he was trying to show you that, listen, I'm a tough guy, known as a guy. National Wrestling Association uses me as a guy. You can't take me if I don't want. So that was a lesson early.
What did you think of Lou as a worker and as a drawing card? He didn't really draw in New York, which is one of the reasons that the WWF split off. Did you think maybe he was behind the times a bit, or?
Well, he was in control of his own games with Muchnick, right? He was the champion. That was decided with the National Wrestling Association, old guys, cigar-smoking old guys. He was good for business. That was an era they're coming out with that you didn't put a powder puff in as champion. So you had a guy that could really, go into a Syracuse University if the amateurs challenged him and make the local Big Ten AUU champ holler, right?
Yeah.
So that's the type of guy they wanted as a title holder.
Were the matches good?
I have lots of respect for him as a go-wrestler. From a high-flying standpoint, didn't compare with the Buddy Rogers. Buddy Rogers was much more aesthetically appealing looking. Lou Thesz and Karl Gotch were always a little defensive. They always wanted, in case you tried to take something from them, they were on guard. You cannot be on guard as an artist. You have to give your maximum performance you have to give some of yourself, ring it totally vulnerable and exposed to your opponent, And so they never, that I know of, totally did that. They always had a little pullback or hold back. So as an absolute, totally entertaining combat sports art match.
Yeah, because as I think back to Lou Thesz, and I never saw him live or anything like that, obviously, but I always think of him backpedaling, and not in a heel way, but just always on guard.
Always a defensive position versus aggressive. And the exciting things are the high-flying moves. But that having been said, Valentine wasn't high-flying, and he still was hugely exciting. Talk about him in a second. He's one of my maybe the favorite, the artist of all, Johnny Valentine. But it was that I got to make sure that I don't look silly by some young stud that's going to try and knock me off pillar. The backpedaling was done on purpose to show fear, not be tall, but it also was done to keep himself in a place that he didn't get vulnerable. So he would sometimes in a ring, you got yourself over. If you're going to try to hook you and go for a body slam, you got a couple choices: block it, squat on it, verse it, or you can let that man pick you up. You got to try and control your body so it doesn't fall on your head like Stan Henson did to Bruno Sammartino, right?
Yeah.
And almost kill you.
Yeah.
But still make the match. So as an artist, you're an athlete. I think that there's lots of tough guys, and I consider myself, I was a tough competitor. The best, but a tough competitor. So I wanted to make sure that I was proud of myself as a competitor, that the fans were proud of me as a real deal, and also give them the most exciting possible match possibly do. So you have a kind of as an artist, you determine yourself how much you give your body, how much you block, how trusting you are in the other side, the guy that's working with. It's like an unbelievable dance to folks, because most people don't know that you don't script, you don't have time to. If you're on the road for 250 years, you sometimes you don't even speak the same language. You go into Japan or Malaysia, the guy doesn't speak English who's your opponent. The referee has a hard time speaking English. You couldn't set up a long-term series of high spots if you wanted to. You couldn't do it. So you're, as an artist, going in there saying, I got to look good, want to win this one because it's good for business. The other kid might want to hook me and he might not want to do business with. So there's all these kind of like a Vandalia onion. There's all kinds of layers.
Yeah.
But the answer is Lou Thesz was great for the business. He wasn't there too long. I mean, with full respect, I think the torch should have been handed off more frequently, but that he kept making money, and so then he was maybe a little more self-serving than he could have been. But we all have to, life in business is about survival. So you play off between fair play, self-serving. And the same thing I did myself, because in some territories, I made sure that I was kept up high level in case all the guys told me to piss off powers, and they all left, reseed my territory with me as a main eventer. So that's a survival mode. Business is survival.
Johnny Valentine.
Oh, I loved him. I used to call him Boop, like in Betty Boop. Pissed him off. Yeah, you're like Betty Boop. Hey, Boop. And he'd laugh. He was a superb artist. Well, first of all, we used to play chess together. He was a bibliophile, loved books. We discussed Will Durant and the history of philosophy and a whole bunch of things in that. Crazy as a hoot, some warped sense of humor. But in the ring, first of all, he's a tough man. He came out of box. If you didn't watch it, he could throw a 5-inch punch, kill, bam, knock you right out. And everybody knew that. So he could really punch. I could punch pretty good, better punchers, but he could punch. He was a bull in that way. Didn't know a lot of holds. He probably shoot holds and all that. But the key was, as an artist, when he threw everything again, even his son Greg got some of his style. He would smack him in matches self. So like Wahoo McDaniel, when you come out of the ring, chest is all bloody with blood spots because Mac punched, bruised, and all that. And we were proud of that, like two masochists, sadomasochists. I one time had a match with him. I was early stages with him. I want to lock up and get going and deliver a good match and all that. He wouldn't let me touch him. He'd backtrack, moved out, went out of the ring. Couldn't understand it. And fans were first saying, boo, and then boring. And after a while, the moves that him and I made, mostly me in reaction to his moves, because someone moves somewhere, you move against it, that first move. Time we made contact, building, they erupted like unbelievable. And all we'd done was lock up. But he had created so much tension among those fans that it was just, the rest of the match was almost anticlimactic, and that was his psychology. He'd let you take him in a reverse chin lock, and he'd fall to the ground. You thought he would get up, fall to the ground, and then he'd make like he was going to be choked out, and you'd be choking him because he liked to work really tight. He'd give you red in the face and have a hard time actually breathing, but still making a match out of it. Then all of a sudden, one leg he'd make a comeback like nobody. It would maybe last 4 or 5 minutes. One comeback. That means one retaliation, right? But when he got up on his feet, they blew wild again. So nobody had, in my opinion, nobody had better talent.
Was he popular? I heard he did a lot of ribs in the dressing room. Was he popular with the guys, or?
No, they was all crazy. I mean, all of a sudden, there's some crudities, right? But go in the washroom and poop stick it under someone's gym bag, and all of a sudden, he went way in it, giggling away. No, he was a crude jokes butt.
JP, what would you do back in the 60s? You're just starting out in the business. You're already main event, and you're with these big stars. What if you got really sick, like you got a bad case of the flu? Did you have to just keep on moving?
Yeah, I remember one time when I was in Bert Ruby's territory, of all things, got mats were really nasty. Remember mats back, it wasn't a trampoline. It was boxing about 20-foot, big old beast, just hard 2x4s or 2x6s, 2x8s or whatever, planks with a little bit of felt and canvas over it. And all of a sudden, somehow I got a mat burn elbow, blew up about 24 hours to a 20-inch diameter. It was just total infection. So, you go away by yourself. You go to the hospital, get it done with. So you were on your own. I was lucky though. I didn't got my nose broken, 4 or 5 ribs broken, and I go in for 5 operations shortly. New hip, new knees, and 2 new shoulders.
Wow.
Business, one every 90 days. But so you pay the price. But so did football players and other folks like so did a plumber. But it was injuries.
JP, were you ever in the ring and got physically sick? Somebody did something to you, and suddenly you're just like, I don't know if I can keep going, or.
The worst one was George Cannon, who weighed about 450 pounds, and he decided nowhere he was going to jump with his 2 feet on my solar plexus, and I guess he thought I would be smart enough to know he's coming down, and that I would be rock hard with my abdominal muscles, that I'd be watching he didn't hit my floating ribs and crack ribs. He was about 5'9", over 400, and totally knocked me out. And it came to, the referee's looking down, didn't knock me out for long, maybe 2-3 seconds, right? Because he'd blown all the wind out of me, just shut down my whole system. So, another time I got backdropped over the top rope. Usually I could hook the top rope, straighten my body out, but I missed the top rope. Ended up third row of chairs, folding wooden chairs, ripped the back muscles, the lower lumbar muscles, ended up in a striker frame that little stretched out for 4 days. Another time I hit my buckle, woke up little with concussion 3 days later. So a couple times
JP, did you realize early on that you were going to be doing permanent damage to your body, or mindset wasn't in that direction?
Thought it would all heal. I never was not hurt. Started because you're doing 200, 250 fights a year, traveling, and you never really heal up. So you're always a walkthrough of the Harley races and the Gene Kaniska, all of us. But I thought if I took a couple of years, it'll all heal up. Step about 39, 40 years old, took a couple of years off, and it got worse. Didn't heal. And I'd done too much trauma joint.
In the 60s, what was the average length of a match? Were you going 10 minutes, 20, 30?
Many times we had 2 or 3 60-minute matches, and we'd go all the way to 60 minutes. The average match would have 4 or 5 guys in a card, sometimes as little as 3. Your job was to give them at least 2 hours entertainment. So that meant, first match would be 30 minutes usually. It's 45. So I never averaged it out, but it's probably in excess of 30 minutes.
And how many nights a week were you working?
6 plus TV or something, anywhere from 7.
Now take us behind the dressing room door dealing with some of the promoters in the 1960s. Can you give us some instances, what it was like?
Yeah, very political. So I learned early on that it's not just about your strength, drawing making sense, political, because you're going into a dressing room where all the boys want to be they all want to be the champ, they all want to wear the strap. They all wonder why you've got break, and they did. Especially me, I lucked out 20 years old, moving into one, and I'm formally in the business. I wrestled San Martino for then one of the key titles, the WWF, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So they can, why the hell has Howard's got break? So you've got those guys badmouth you or intimidate, tell a promoter you should be there, and so there's a politics between the wrestlers themselves, some trying to intimidate guys or just some to create a bad image, bad mouth, create trouble, dressing room for you, or with the promoter. Promoters are walking through all of this. They know they got their stooges, they got the guys that snitch on everybody, because the promoter was the enemy. He cut your check, so he determined your lifestyle.
JP, the guy who cuts the check is always the enemy.
Always, yes.
Yeah.
You know that, right?
Yes.
And then I worked out and went on the enemy side because I became the promoter. So But the answer is, it was like a zoo. It's a world, because I've been around hockey, football, and it's nothing quite the same as a wrestler's dressing room. It's manipulative, it's strange, because for every person, there's a kind of a whole story. It's very, very, somehow I learned to politic my way through, not come out with too many. I got a couple knives thrust in my throat. One time when my wife Karen was first pregnant, first son Sean, they threatened to cut her belly open. Pretty wild stuff, eh? They blew in Cleveland, Ohio, they blew my mailbox over with a dynamite stick right over the top of my house. In and out of the ring and in and out of the dressing room where strange things happen. Everybody protect themselves pretty well. There was not, you'd have your little posse or something like that. You'd try. But I was such a loner, and I was moving so fast up the food chain in the business. I didn't have time to develop a posse. That's why eventually I wanted to do my own territory for a reason, control my destiny a little more. So lots of strangeness. And different than, when you're someone who owns a football team or hockey team or basketball team, you can put a lot of pressure on them because the team environment is harder to put pressure on solo practitioners.
And that's what I want to ask you about. Is it different because it's every man for himself in that dressing room versus a team sport?
Yes, I think.
Are you very self-centered with your thinking, like you come into the dressing room and it's all, and not in a bad way, but me versus a team sport where you need the entire cooperation of everyone?
Yeah, the answer is there's all kinds of subtleties, variations on the answer to that, but the bottom line is that's correct because it's the way it's structured. You need, as a solo practitioner, or unless but usually the man that's making the most money is the guy that's singles champ. You need to get up that food chain. That means someone else doesn't get up. So you're all each other's enemy. To be a little friendly, but still sacrifice that guy going up.
And that's very different because did you ever go into the dressing room and think, oh, this individual's not getting enough of a push, or was it just you were concerned with you?
No, I actually like helping with other people's brands. So that's why I backed off a lot and would help create my own talent and through my own television shows and my promotions that I like helping the other guy. Not so much for him as an individual, although that got better as I got older. It was like I was helping another artist, and I was partly influential in mentoring him or positioning him or coaching him, all the rest, and I felt good about that because something in the business buzz that's unbelievable. It's like a sex times up, and that's the walkout. Oh, but he's so live. Whether it's 1,000 people, a full house, or 20,000, I can still talk about hairs on the back of my arms to get goosebumps because that's the thrill. That's the thrill of the chase. That's the ultimate goal. Be around an absolute full sellout, and everybody sell out, and that wash the crowd, you mind bog.
JP, is there an instance from the early 60s that you remember, a big sellout that really sticks in your mind that you can think back to now?
I went against Chic in Patty's Day, Cleveland, Ohio, 4-5.
When is this in the 70s or the 60s?
Yes.
Okay, 70s.
Okay. 70s. Actually, the first son was Sean, Thanksgiving Day, 71. Thanksgiving Day in the wrestling business is one of the most lucrative days. That and the days 6 Boxing Day, Christmas, or New Year. If you got a good show, you should sell out your building. I had 2 shows. I had one that day at 11 o'clock at Buffalo War Memorial Arts, in the evening at 8 o'clock at Cleveland Arena. Help, Karen, if you're a good promoter's wife, you'll by 12 noon so I can go in both shows. She did. I remember going in, and both were almost total sellout. Me coming in with an unbelievable bunch of Havana cigars, booze, and everything. There's a full house, and I just got my firstborn son, Shawn Michael Powers. My wife got a nice Corvette, blue Corvette and I got a sellout house, euphoric. Still picture it. And then the funniest thing of that one is that I let the boys have the booze and cigars part of the first match in the first dressing room. By the time they got 8 o'clock in Cleveland, Ohio, it was unbelievable because half of them were smashed. If they hadn't got buzzed on 2 or 3 Havana cigars, they were smashed on the first-class scotch or all the beer they could drink. So that was, but part of that, not just that, was the buzz in the crowd. And then also, when I went against Antonio Inoki, sold the National Wrestling Federation to Inoki so he could go into the mixed martial arts side. That was 73, December 73. Full house in that gym. That was a buzz. Probably about, I say I maybe got 15 or 20 of those type of, it feels like it was yesterday. I can still get the euphoric flush.
As the 60s developed, where did you see yourself going? Did you think that you had the potential to be an NWA champion, or did you have your eyes set on promoting?
Well, I knew, it's a really good question. I had started by the early 60s, so let's say 63 I'm against Sammer, 64, and that's a WWF champion. Then I went into NWA champion, which at that time was Thez, and then Knisk. So that was St. Louis, Toronto territory, which was an NWA Toronto territory. And then in 67 also I went AWA against Vern Gagne. They were territory was getting a little flat, and so they brought Valentine and Powers in 1967 to re-stimulate that territory. So I've been around 3 of those. I had not yet created, which I did in '68, NWF, my own franchise. I got kind of inklings that if I played ball, I might have went up the food chain, possibly in the NWA. But at that time, they were maturing Terry Funk, as was Boston. And so I thought, not sure that I wanted to play that political game. I wanted to do more of my own destiny. So I guess I was morphing into more of the promoter's role than trying to go into being somebody's top boy.
What would you have had to do if you wanted to be considered to be NWA champion? Is there any territory you'd have to work or?
Well, then it was St. Louis. St. Louis owned the world. You had to always come back and work St. Louis, and you worked for the key guys, which was Toronto and California and Mexico, and that all the key guys, the Luderos in Mexico and all that.
And you worked St. Louis?
Yes, I worked St. Louis, and then from there I went.
Were there cities where you didn't get as good a response as you would have liked?
Always.
Give me some specifics, some areas where you just couldn't get over.
No, as arson, I'd want to bury them, but as the truthful guy.
Like, for example, hey, I couldn't get over in Florida. I don't know, the people just didn't take to me.
I couldn't get over in Florida, that's correct, but that's because Eddie Graham, who owned the territory, and I was just coming in, and I didn't want to stay there for a long period of time. That was called homesteading. If you got over, you'd stay there for sometimes 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes decades. And so they knew I wasn't coming to Homestead, and so I didn't get moved into, I went against Klondike Bills and a few folks like that. And so I didn't get in a position to get the matches that would get the best response. Where in the San Martino time when they brought me in, they needed someone like Toots Mondt, needed someone like a Powers, blonde, counterpoint to a big bulldog type of San Martino, barrel-chested and all that. They needed a flamboyant new Buddy Rogers type. And so they needed me, and I filled the spot. Because the spot was there to be filled, you get put in the circumstances that make you get over that. So it's not all about what you want to do. It's about, can the promoter and the booker put you in the place that you're there? Do you have the goods to carry the day?
So for example, you're in Florida, you're working with Eddie. Mm-hmm. He's not giving you a push. Do you dread every night going to the different cities, the locker room?
No, not good guy.
What's your mindset?
Do I buy some property in Freeport, Bahamas, and continue my real estate enterprises? Yeah. and so between times, I would be checking out real estate properties. Do I buy into this hotel or all? Because I was in real estate from early age, and so my creative juices were geared towards. Do I believe that the Lucayan Beach Casino is going to get built in the next years by the Prime Minister of Bahamas?
So you could be in Florida, not getting a push,
yes,
but you're still making use of your time.
Oh, absolutely. I'm down in the reference library because that's before Internet and Google, and I'm researching things, and I'm honing my business skills because from early age I was around due to business and career development, which means I was training salespeople for insurance and real estate and the rest. I had a well-rounded curiosity about multiple art forms, and especially business, because see, I treat work business as an art. So I never was not. I don't get bored. That would be my problem, my fault. So if I was not figuring I was going up the food chain in the wrestling business at that time, I was taking advantage that I was down there scouting out Florida or Bahamas real estate.
Now, JP, before you became a promoter, was there one territory or area that really took to you that made you think, hey, I can really go places in this part of the country?
Yeah, Frank Tunney's territory, which is Toronto territory, and close to my hometown by an hour. I got the right push. I was going to be the next Whipper Watson, and Whipper Watson was an iconic guy there. He was 53, and so they pushed me, and I was the right guy, and I got over on TV and all that. And so, yeah, that was first there. That's where I actually asked for points. I said, Frank Tunney, he was a book wrestler. I said, Frank, I'm bored. Well, I want to do something. Oh, well, let me be a TV commentator or something, or a promote booker, or give me a town. What do you mean, no? Well, let me buy points in the territory. I've saved us some money. Well, they're not for sale. So I bought a couple of small towns, and then we'll go over to Buffalo and see what Pedro's territory is on it to us, and see if you can buy out Pedro. So the bottom line is that by the time I was 22, I was doing my own small towns. Being a wrestler and bouncing around the ring, taking the bows and chasing the dollies was not a stage emoting. Next stage was...
Were there a lot of women in the early days of wrestling behind the scenes?
Oh, bless their souls. There was some good...
What was that? Were they waiting for you behind the... How did that work?
Oh, well. Now, we might have some youngsters or some old grandmas.
Okay,
but bottom line is there was lots of... Some of them... There was actually a term that's called ring. There was lots of variety and lots of variation, and lots of places to deal with those varieties and those variations. And you actually had to take breaks. That was nice for a young man because most businesses don't have that. I guess the rock and roll guys did it. One time Joe Namath named how many ladies he had consorted with, close.
Consorted, yeah.
I like that word. Consorted with of a close nature. I went back, took me a while, but I figured I'd beat him by about 100. Well, they were all not people. They were.
Did it surprise you? Because wrestling at the time wasn't really a mainstream sport like the NFL or Major League Baseball. It didn't matter, right?
Yeah, I never counted at that time until that time, and I never it was there. I got in the business because I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance. Some ladies liked folks that were good looking and tough.
Okay, JP, this brings us up to 1968, and we're not going to cover that in this episode.
Yes.
But we are going to cover it in our next episode. As you go into the world of promotion, which is the exact opposite of being a performer,
yes,
and create purchase a territory that was well ahead of its time.
It actually wasn't well ahead of its time. The fellow who owned it was unbelievably talented, but for some reason he hit a slump. Pedro Martinez. Yes, but he helped mentor me. I've been lucky in life. I've had so many great mentors, from ring work, television work, building around athletes, celebrities, and that. I've been blessed by mentors that deal with guys, and I don't have a lot of patience. So I was a guy to deal with. But the answer is yes. That was 68, and that was a seminal time. That was a turning point, a tipping. I started to morph into a senior.
Okay, JP, we're going to cover that next time. The Johnny Powers story, right here on 57talk.com. JP, it's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. You're a great interviewer. Thank you very, very much.
We will talk again soon.